Don't let him drink that. Please. I don't care what it costs me, just don't let him drink that. When Nora Castillo took a job as a live-in maid at the Hayes estate, she told herself it was just another assignment. Get in, find the evidence, get out. What she didn't plan for was her 2-year-old daughter Lily knocking a poisoned glass out of Ethan Hayes' hand on a quiet Tuesday evening, changing everything. Ethan is the sole heir to Hayes Capital, a man who trusts no one and answers to no one, except, it seems, a toddler who has decided he belongs to her. Someone inside that house wants Ethan dead before the year-end audit, and they've already built a file with Nora's name on it to take the fall. The only way Nora can save Ethan is to stop protecting her cover, but the moment she does, she loses the one thing she's never let herself have, the glass that almost ended everything. The Hayes estate sat on 4 acres of manicured silence, 12 miles outside of Newport Beach. The kind of property that didn't show up on public maps and didn't need to. Iron gates, a long, eucalyptus-lined driveway, and a main house with more rooms than any single person needed, which was precisely how Ethan Hayes preferred it. Fewer rooms meant fewer reasons for people to linger. He had never been the type to fill space with noise. Nora Castillo had been inside the house for exactly 22 days when she understood in the particular way that trained observers understand things, that the silence here was not peace. It was pressure, the kind that built behind walls before they cracked. She was folding linen in the second-floor hallway when she heard his voice carry up from the study below. Not the words, just the tone. Clipped. Final. The sound of a man ending a phone call, the way other men ended arguments. A moment later, the study door opened and closed, and the house went quiet again, in the way it always did after Ethan moved through it, as though the rooms themselves exhaled when he left. Nora set down the pillowcase she was holding and checked her watch. 6:47 in the evening. Lily had been asleep in the small room off the kitchen for 40 minutes, which meant Nora had, by her estimate, another hour and 15 before her daughter's internal clock woke her and sent her padding through the house in search of her mother, or something equally interesting. Lily did not distinguish between the two with any consistency. She picked up the linen basket and moved toward the stairs, letting herself be exactly what she appeared to be, a woman doing her job, unhurried, unremarkable. 3 weeks into the assignment, and she had learned the rhythms of the household, the way she learned all households, through the negative space. What was never discussed? Which rooms were cleaned but never used? Which staff members looked at the ground when Claudia Hayes walked in? Claudia Hayes, sister-in-law, widow of Marcus Hayes, Ethan's older brother, dead 14 months ago of what the coroner had ruled a cardiac event at the age of 41. Nora had read that file 3 times before she accepted this assignment, and each time she came away with the same feeling she got from reading reports with pages missing. She was halfway down the stairs when she heard the second sound, not Ethan's voice this time, but the particular soft percussion of Lily being awake and mobile when she was supposed to be neither. Lily. Nora said it quietly, with the specific frequency of a mother who has learned that volume is rarely the most effective tool. She set the basket on the landing and moved toward the study. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see Ethan standing at the bar cart near the far window, his jacket off his back to the door, pouring 2 fingers of bourbon into a crystal glass with the kind of automatic precision that suggested this was not a decision he made consciously anymore. It was just what happened at the end of the day. The light was going gold through the west-facing windows, and the room smelled of old paper and lemon oil, and something else underneath that Nora's brain flagged before she could name it. She pushed the door open. Lily was already in the room. She had found her way in through some toddler logic Nora would never fully reconstruct. Down the back hallway, through the door Nora had left half open that morning when she dusted the shelves, and straight toward the most interesting object at her eye level, which happened to be the amber color of the liquid in Ethan Hayes' glass. Lily was drawn to amber. She associated it with apple juice and was almost never wrong. Almost. Ethan heard the door and turned, glass in hand, already lifting it. He stopped when he saw Nora in the doorway. His expression did not change in any way that most people would notice, but Nora had spent 3 weeks cataloging the small shifts in his face, and she caught the fractional tightening around his eyes that meant he was adjusting, recalculating, deciding whether to be annoyed. He did not look down. Lily moved faster than either of them. She crossed the space between the door and Ethan's hand in the particular way that 2-year-olds move, all momentum and no braking system, and hit the glass from below with both palms outstretched, the way she hit everything she wanted to claim. The glass left Ethan's hand in a slow arc, turned once in the air, and shattered against the side of the bar cart. Bourbon and crystal scattered across the hardwood in a 10-inch radius. Ethan went very still. Lily looked at the mess on the floor with great satisfaction, then looked up at Ethan and said with complete seriousness, "No." The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds, which felt considerably longer. Nora crossed the room in 3 steps, scooped Lily up before she could reach down and investigate the broken glass, and turned to face Ethan with the measured calm she had developed over 8 years of working in situations where measured calm was the only viable option. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes. She was supposed to be asleep. I'll have this cleaned up immediately." Ethan looked at her, then at the glass, then at Lily, who was regarding him from Nora's hip with the serene authority of someone who has done exactly what she meant to do. "How did she get in here?" he said. Not angry, just precise. "The back hallway. I left the connecting door open this morning. That was my error. It won't happen again." "No," he said, and the word had an edge to it that Nora recognized as something other than anger. It was the sound of a man who lived alone and had forgotten, somewhere in the architecture of his days, that the world could simply enter without permission. "It won't." He picked up his jacket from the chair and left the room without another word. Nora stood in the amber-soaked silence and looked at the shattered glass. Lily was already trying to slide down from her hip toward the interesting fragments on the floor. Nora tightened her grip. "No," she told her daughter, borrowing the word. "Absolutely not." She put Lily in the playpen in the kitchen, retrieved the cleaning kit from the utility closet, and returned to the study. She worked efficiently, sweeping the glass into a sealed bag, blotting the bourbon from the hardwood, wiping down the bar cart. She moved through it like a person doing a job, which she was, and also like a person doing something else entirely, which she also was. The smell she had noticed when she first entered the room, underneath the bourbon and the lemon oil, was still present in the air around the bar cart. Faint, almost nothing. The kind of thing you registered and then talked yourself out of. Nora did not talk herself out of it. She looked at the sealed bag in her hand. The crystal fragments inside were still wet with bourbon. The liquid pooled at the bottom corners of the bag. She thought about what she knew and what she didn't know, and what the difference between those 2 categories was going to cost her. Then she sealed the bag a second time and put it in the deep pocket of her apron. She was back in the kitchen, Lily on her lap and a cup of reheated tea in her hands, when the front door opened, and she heard Claudia Hayes' voice in the entry hall. This was unusual. Claudia typically called ahead. She was a woman who believed in the social value of the announced arrival, and she deployed it consistently. Nora set her tea down. Claudia appeared in the kitchen doorway a few minutes later, already out of her coat, already wearing the particular smile she used in rooms where the staff was present. Warm, slightly elevated, the smile of a woman performing graciousness rather than feeling it. She was 51, preserved in the way that money preserved women of her background, with the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding that rooms reorganized themselves around confident entrances. "Nora," she said as though they were old friends, "I didn't realize you'd still be up." "I'm just getting Lily settled for the night," Nora said. "Can I get you anything, Mrs. Hayes?" "Oh no, don't bother." Claudia's gaze moved to Lily with the particular quality of attention that Nora had learned to track. Not genuine interest, but information gathering dressed as warmth. "Sweet girl. Lily, isn't it? She has your eyes." Nora kept her expression pleasant. She had never introduced Lily to Claudia. She had mentioned her daughter's name to exactly 2 people in this house, the estate manager, Douglas Prentice, during the hiring process, and Marta, the cook, in a conversation about the kitchen storage that happened to drift toward their respective children. Claudia Hayes had not been present for either exchange, and Nora had not included Lily's name in her written employment application. "She does," Nora said. "She's a good sleeper usually. Tonight was a bit of an exception. Children always know when something exciting is happening." Claudia smiled at Lily, who looked back at her with the frank assessment that toddlers applied to everyone before they learned to be polite about it. "I just came by to look in on Ethan. Don't mind me." She moved through the kitchen toward the main hallway with the ease of someone who had always moved through this house as though it belonged to her, which in certain financial senses, that the year-end audit would eventually clarify, she had been behaving as though it did for well over a year. Nora listened to her footsteps on the tile, then on the hardwood beyond the kitchen, moving toward the east wing, where Ethan's study and private rooms were located. Lily put her head down on Nora's shoulder. Nora picked up her phone from the counter and opened the messaging application that was not available on any commercial platform and did not log to any server that could be subpoenaed. She typed 9 words. Sample secured. Need analysis prioritized. Possible compound unknown. 24 hours. She sent it, put the phone face down, and stroked her daughter's back while she listened to the house settle around them. "You did good today, baby," she said quietly into Lily's hair. It wasn't strictly professional to say so, but it was true. And Nora had learned a long time ago that the true things were worth saying, even when they didn't fit the role she was playing. Lily made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement, and might have been sleep arriving early. From somewhere in the east wing, Nora heard the low register of Ethan Hayes' voice, and then Claudia's, the particular cadence of a conversation that was performing cordiality rather than achieving it. She had heard that cadence before. She had heard it in depositions, and in conference rooms, and in hospital hallways where families stood in clusters and smiled at each other, with all the warmth of people dividing an estate. She looked at the sealed bag in her apron pocket. 24 hours. She could hold the line for 24 hours. She had been telling herself that for 22 days. Outside, the Newport Beach evening was going dark along the water, the last light pulling away from the windows of the house, the way it pulled away from everything eventually. Quietly, without announcement. Inside, a 2-year-old breathed against her mother's shoulder, entirely unaware that she had just changed the trajectory of 3 people's lives, with the innocent precision of someone who simply saw something that didn't look right and acted accordingly. Nora held her daughter and watched the kitchen window go dark. In the east wing, the voices continued. She would remember this moment later. The weight of Lily, the smell of bourbon she hadn't been able to entirely get out of her hands, despite the cleaning. The specific quality of the silence that came after Claudia stopped talking, and before Ethan answered. She would remember thinking, "I have time. I can manage this. I have a plan." She would be wrong about all 3. Behind the sealed bag in her apron pocket, the fragments of crystal held whatever they held, patient and indifferent, waiting for someone with the right equipment to ask them the right questions. Claudia left the estate at 9:14. Nora knew because she heard the front door close and then stood at the kitchen window long enough to watch the headlights of Claudia's silver Range Rover swing out through the gate and disappear down the eucalyptus lane. She counted to 60 after the lights vanished, an old habit from a job that rewarded patience, and then she moved. Ethan was still in the study. She could see the thin line of light under the door as she passed through the main hallway on her way to the east wing utility closet. She retrieved what she needed: a small evidence bag, a pair of nitrile gloves from the first aid kit she had positioned there in her second week for exactly this kind of contingency, and went back to the kitchen. The bar cart. She had cleaned it thoroughly, or appeared to, but the bottle of bourbon Ethan had poured from was still there, sitting where it always sat, on the second shelf, dark amber glass catching the light from the range hood. She studied it without touching it for a moment. Full, or nearly. The seal had been broken at some point, and then the cap replaced, which was how bars worked, how households worked. You opened, you poured, you capped. There was nothing wrong with a recapped bourbon bottle, except that someone had been in this room today, and the smell she had registered was not bourbon. Nora pulled on the gloves. She photographed the bottle in place with her phone, the non-commercial one, the encrypted one, capturing the label, the cap, seal, the position on the shelf relative to the other bottles. Then she swabbed the rim of the bottle with a cotton collection tool from the evidence bag and sealed that separately. She did not take the bottle. She could not take the bottle. It would be noticed, and noticed tonight. And she had already pushed her exposure further than her parameters allowed by keeping the glass fragments. She tagged both samples with the same timestamp, stripped off the gloves, and stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hands flat on the counter. The parameters she was operating under were clear enough in theory. Collect evidence. Do not engage. Do not intervene directly. Do not allow personal proximity to targets, meaning Ethan, to compromise the integrity of the investigation. Report to the handler, a woman named Patricia Shen, who worked for the Hayes Capital Board through a third-party fiduciary firm, and let the board make decisions about what came next. She had been following those parameters for 22 days. The problem was that the parameters had been written for a situation where the timeline was flexible, where the primary target, the person whose financial crimes were being documented, was engaged in something that moved at the speed of corporate fraud, which was slow and paper-heavy and left trails, not at the speed of poison, which was a different kind of problem entirely. If she reported tonight, Patricia would escalate. Escalation meant the board, and the board meant lawyers. And lawyers meant timelines and depositions and the specific grinding machinery of institutional response, which operated on a schedule that did not account for what happened if Ethan Hayes poured himself another glass of bourbon tomorrow morning. She picked up her phone and sent a second message. Escalate timeline. This is not standard financial. Will explain when I have full analysis. Do not move, yet I need 72 hours. She didn't wait for the response. She knew Patricia well enough to know it would arrive as a single question mark, and then silence, which was Patricia's way of saying, "You'd better be right." She put the phone in her pocket and went to check on Lily. Her daughter was flat on her back in the portable crib in the small room off the kitchen, arms flung wide, in the particular posture of a child who has decided that sleeping should be conducted at full extension. Nora stood in the doorway and watched her breathe for a moment. This was something she had started doing after Lily was born, standing in doorways and watching her daughter breathe, and she had never managed to talk herself out of it. It was not efficient. It didn't serve any operational purpose. She did it anyway. She thought about Ethan Hayes standing at the bar cart with the glass already lifted and the fraction of a second between Lily's hands and his mouth, and felt something move through her that she identified precisely, and then set aside. The way she set aside anything that didn't fit the shape of what she was allowed to feel in this house. She was still standing in the doorway when she heard Ethan's study door open. His footsteps in the hallway were unhurried. He wasn't looking for anyone. He was, from the sound of it, simply moving through his own house in the way that people moved through places where they didn't expect to be observed, with the particular looseness of solitude. He went toward the kitchen, and Nora heard the refrigerator open and close, and then the sound of water running. She stayed where she was. A minute passed. Then his voice came through the small room's thin wall. Not directed at her. He didn't know she was there, but audible nonetheless. He was on his phone. "I told Douglas to pull those contracts by the end of the week," he said. "If Claudia wants to review them, she can wait until legal has finished the current audit cycle." A pause. "I don't care what she said. Those accounts are not hers to access without written authorization, and that hasn't changed." Nora listened to the silence that followed and thought, he knows something is wrong. Not everything. Probably not the poison, not yet, but something. The way he'd said Claudia's name had the quality of a word that had been handled too many times, worn smooth in the middle, where it should still have had edges. She had read his file before coming into this house. Not the public version, not the Forbes profile, But the actual file, the one Patricia had compiled over 6 months, from financial records and communications and the testimony of people who worked for him and near him. She knew he was 38, that he'd taken over Hayes Capital 18 months ago under circumstances that the board officially called a difficult transition, and that the internal communications called something considerably more fraught. She knew his father had died of a sudden stroke 4 years ago, and that Ethan had spent 6 months afterward pushing for an independent review of the estate's financial management, and that the board, under Claudia's considerable influence at the time, had declined. She knew he slept 4 to 5 hours a night. She had figured that out herself from the lights. She knew he took his coffee black, and that he read physical newspapers, and that he had, in 22 days, not once eaten dinner at the dining room table. He ate at his desk, or not at all. She knew he had looked at Lily today with an expression she was still trying to classify. Not irritation exactly, though irritation had been there first. Something underneath it. Something that had moved through his face in the 2 seconds between Lily saying no and him walking out of the room. She had told herself it didn't matter. The water ran in the kitchen again. His footsteps went back toward the east wing. The house went quiet. Nora finally moved away from the doorway and sat down on the narrow cot she kept in the small room for nights when Lily didn't settle well. She reached into her bag for the notepad she kept for exactly nothing, for the writing that wasn't reporting, the writing that was just organizing what she knew into shapes that made sense. She wrote, "Bar cart, bottle tampered, sample secured, glass fragments secured." Claudia arrived unannounced, knew Lily's name, source unknown, monitored. Possible, or overheard. Check kitchen entry camera log. She wrote, "He's already suspicious of her. Not enough, not specific enough. He doesn't know the shape of the thing yet." She wrote, "Lily." Then she stopped writing and looked at the word for a moment, and then she closed the notepad and put it away and lay down on the cot without taking her shoes off, the way she always slept when she wasn't sure what the night would bring. Outside the window, the Newport Beach sky had gone fully dark, the kind of dark that came off the Pacific with weight to it, pressing the world smaller. Inside the estate was quiet in the way that estates were quiet when something was being planned inside their walls. Not the quiet of rest, but the quiet of held breath. Nora stared at the ceiling. 22 days into a job she had taken because she was good at it. 22 days of aprons and linen and conversations about grocery orders and learning the faces that the staff made when certain names were mentioned. 22 days of telling herself she had time, that she had a plan, that she could manage every variable. One moment of Lily in a doorway, hands out, running towards something amber-colored that she thought was apple juice. Nora pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes and breathed through the particular feeling of a plan beginning to fray at the edges. And then she did what she had always done when a plan frayed. She found the next handhold, and she held on. 72 hours. She had asked for 72 hours. She would need every one of them. That no one else does. The analysis came back in 18 hours, not 24. Patricia's contact at the independent lab, a forensic toxicologist named Dr. Reeves, who worked out of a facility in Irvine and had handled 3 of Nora's previous cases without ever knowing her real name, sent the encrypted summary at 12 minutes past noon on a Wednesday. Nora read it twice, standing in the estate's laundry room with the dryer running and the door locked. Warfarin, pharmaceutical grade, concentrated. Present in the glass fragments at levels approximately 8 times the standard therapeutic dose. Combined with the 2 fingers of bourbon Ethan typically poured, and she had counted, she had observed, she had made it her business to know exactly how he drank, the result would have presented within 3 to 4 hours as a sudden hemorrhagic event. At 38, in apparent good health, with no prior cardiac history, the attending physicians would have had no immediate reason to suspect anything other than what it looked like, a catastrophic and unpredictable internal bleed. The coroner would have filed it as they'd filed Marcus Hayes 14 months ago, a cardiac event, sudden onset, tragic. Nora set the phone face down on top of the dryer and stood very still for a moment, listening to the drum turning behind her. She was good at this, at receiving terrible information and giving it exactly enough time to fully land before she put it in the correct compartment and moved forward. She had been trained to do this. She had also simply had a life that required it. She picked up the phone and called Patricia directly. No message this time, voice only on the encrypted line. "Tell me," Patricia said without preamble. Patricia Shen had worked in fiduciary investigation for 23 years and had the conversational efficiency of someone who had long since stopped having patience for preamble. "Warfarin, concentrated. The glass fragments confirm it." Nora kept her voice level and low under the dryer noise. This wasn't intended to look like poisoning. It was intended to look like a medical event, the same way Marcus Hayes' death looked like a medical event. A pause. "You're making a connection. I'm noting a pattern. Whether the board makes the connection is their decision. What I need from you right now is a decision on my timeline. Claudia knows something is wrong. She arrived unannounced last night, the same night as the glass incident, and she knew my daughter's name from a source I haven't been able to trace yet. That tells me she has eyes in this house that I haven't identified. Can you identify them in 72 hours? I can try, but I need something from you first." Nora moved to the corner of the laundry room, putting another few feet between herself and the door. "Do not move on Claudia yet. Not legally, not through the board. If she thinks the net is closing, she accelerates. I need her to believe she's still in control." "And Hayes?" "He doesn't know yet." This was the part that caught in Nora's chest, the way things sometimes caught when she let them briefly, before she pushed them through. "He almost drank it. He's fine. He doesn't know how close it was." Another pause, longer this time. "Nora, you understand that our obligation at this point—" "I understand our obligation. I'm asking you to trust my read on the timing." She kept her voice even, professional, the voice she used when she needed to mean something and sound calm at the same time. "One more day. Give me one more day before anything moves." The dryer ran. Patricia breathed. "One day," Patricia said finally. "And then I'm putting the board on notice regardless." "Thank you." She ended the call and stood with the phone in her hand for a moment, and then she put it back in her apron pocket and unlocked the laundry room door and went back to being a woman doing her job, which was the only disguise that had ever worked for her. She found Lily in the kitchen with Marta the cook, both of them apparently engaged in the serious project of sorting dried pasta by shape into small bowls. This was Lily's current favorite occupation, requiring no encouragement and producing genuine satisfaction in both parties. Marta was 63 and had worked for the Hayes family for 19 years and had the quality of someone who had seen enough of the family's internal weather to have stopped being surprised by it without ever having stopped caring about the house itself. "She's very methodical," Marta said, nodding at Lily without looking up from the pasta. "Just like you." "Is that a good thing?" Nora said. "Depends on what you're sorting." Nora watched Lily transfer a rigatoni from the wrong bowl to the right one with great precision and thought, yes, it does. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the counter and tried to think about Claudia's informant. The household staff was small. Douglas Prentice, the estate manager who had worked for the Hayes family since before Ethan's father died, and who Nora had assessed in her first week as someone too cautious and too invested in the estate's stability to be working against it. Marta, a part-time groundskeeper named Calvin who came 3 days a week and didn't come inside. A housekeeper who worked Tuesday and Friday mornings, a woman named Denise, whom Nora had overlapped with twice and assessed as disengaged, more interested in the podcast she played through her earbuds than in any of the human activity around her. None of them were Claudia's informant. Nora was almost certain of it, and in this work, almost certain was the operative standard, because absolute certainty was a luxury that the timelines rarely afforded. Which meant the information about Lily had come from somewhere else, security footage possibly. The estate had cameras at the entry points, and Claudia, as a frequent visitor, had presumably at some point had access to the security system's administrative portal. Or it had come from Douglas, who managed vendor and staff contracts, and would have a copy of Nora's employment paperwork which listed Lily as a dependent for insurance purposes. Or it had come from something smaller, more incidental, a comment in passing, a name dropped in a phone call. Or Claudia had done her own research on Nora before Nora arrived. That last possibility sat uncomfortably. It implied foreknowledge, which implied that someone had told Claudia a new hire was coming who wasn't quite what she appeared, which implied that Claudia's network extended further into the board's infrastructure than the board believed. Nora filed it under urgent, unresolved, and moved on. The rest of the morning passed in the ordinary rhythms of the house. She did the East Wing rooms, remade Ethan's bed with the clean linen she'd folded the night before, emptied the wastebasket in the study without allowing herself to look at the bar cart for more than a moment. The bourbon bottle was in its usual place. Nothing had been touched. She was finishing the bathroom in the East Wing guest suite when she heard Ethan come in from his morning run at 11:30, later than usual. He ran the perimeter of the property every morning at 7, and then again sometimes in the late morning if the previous day's meetings had run long. Today's late run told her yesterday evening's call had kept him up. She gave him 20 minutes, then went downstairs to the kitchen to make the mid-morning coffee that Douglas had told her during her initial orientation that Mr. Hayes preferred to have available but never requested. He won't ask, Douglas had said with the faint air of someone conveying the rules of a complicated game, but he notices if it's not there. She had the coffee made and on the counter at 11:53. At 11:55, Ethan walked into the kitchen. He was still in his running clothes, dark gray, unremarkable. His hair was damp at the temples. He looked like someone who had been running from something and had covered enough distance to be tired without being finished, which was, Nora suspected, a fairly accurate description of him in general. He poured himself a mug of coffee without acknowledging her presence, which was his standard operating mode. Nora had noticed early on that he existed in a particular relationship with the staff that was neither warm nor unkind. He simply moved through spaces where other people were, as though the awareness of them was something he managed consciously rather than naturally, the way someone managing a mild allergy navigated a room. Not hostility, more like the practiced detachment of a person who had learned to regulate proximity. She was gathering the cleaning supplies to take upstairs when he spoke. She does that every time. Nora turned. He was looking at Lily, who had finished her pasta project and migrated to the kitchen floor with a set of plastic measuring cups that Marta had produced from somewhere and that Lily was currently stacking with intense concentration. "Does what?" Nora said. "Knocks things over." He said it without inflection, not quite an accusation, not quite a question. The lamp in the east hallway last week. The file box in the foyer the week before. He took a sip of coffee. She's not clumsy. She's deliberate. Nora looked at her daughter. Lily had gotten the largest measuring cup balanced on top of two smaller ones and was reaching for a fourth. "She is," Nora said. "She doesn't like things that she thinks are in the wrong place." A pause. And where does a 2-year-old form opinions about where things belong? The same place anyone does, I think. She just hasn't learned yet to keep the opinion to herself. He was quiet for a moment. Then something happened in his expression that was not quite amusement and not quite the absence of it. Something in between. Something that had been dormant long enough that it moved the way things moved when they'd been still too long. "That must be inconvenient sometimes," he said. "Every day," Nora said. "It's also occasionally useful." She kept her voice exactly level. She was looking at the measuring cups. She was not thinking about the fact that if Lily had been 3 seconds later yesterday evening, if she had taken the longer route through the back hallway, if she had stopped at the potted plant she liked to pull leaves off, if she had tripped on the rug near the kitchen door, none of this conversation would be happening. She was not thinking about that. Ethan finished his coffee, set the mug in the sink, and left the kitchen. Lily got the 4th measuring cup onto the stack and looked at it with pure satisfaction. "Yeah," Nora said quietly. Me too. Afternoon brought a change in weather. Marine layer coming in from the ocean, thickening the light to a flat silver, and with it, Claudia Hayes. This time she called ahead. Douglas informed Nora 15 minutes before Claudia arrived that there would be a guest for tea, and Nora set the sitting room accordingly. Service for 2. The good cups, the shortbread that Marta kept in the pantry for Claudia's visits, because Claudia had, at some point, years ago, mentioned that she liked it, and the household had adapted accordingly. The way households adapted to the preferences of anyone who visited often enough to seem permanent. Nora brought in the tea at 3 o'clock. Ethan was already in the sitting room, jacket on now, the particular formality he adopted when Claudia was present. Not warmth exactly, but performance of courtesy, which was its own kind of discipline. Claudia was on the settee, with her legs crossed and one hand resting on the arm, in the way of a woman who had learned early and thoroughly that posture was its own form of argument. She smiled at Nora when Nora brought the service. It was the same smile as last night, warm, elevated, gracious. "Thank you, Nora," she said. "Of course, Mrs. Hayes." Nora poured and withdrew to a point near the door that was just inside visible range if either of them turned. This was standard for these visits. Claudia preferred attentive service, which meant a body available and a presence acknowledged, which meant Nora could stay in the room and listen without it being unusual. She had exploited this preference every time Claudia visited. Today's conversation began with the charity gala the following weekend. Claudia was on the committee, and there was a question of whether Ethan would attend, and the question had the quality of something that had been asked before and declined before, and was being re-asked with slightly different framing in hopes of a different answer. Ethan gave the same answer in different words. Claudia moved on with the ease of someone who had not actually expected to win that exchange, but had needed to run it. Then she said, "The Meridian accounts came up in my call with the investment team this morning." Something shifted in the room. Nora kept her eyes on the middle distance. "They mentioned that to you?" Ethan's voice was level, but differently level than his ordinary register. The levelness of a person holding something steady with effort. "Those accounts are under legal review." "I know. I just wanted you to hear from me directly that I've been cooperating fully with the review process." Claudia lifted her teacup with both hands, a gesture that managed to seem both casual and deliberate. "I have nothing to hide, Ethan. You know that. Marcus and I managed those accounts the way your father wanted them managed, conservatively, with the family's long-term interests in mind." "That's one interpretation." "It's the accurate one." She set the cup down. "I know you've had concerns. I respect that. You're thorough. That's a Hayes quality. But I want us to be on the same side here. We're family." A pause that had something in it. "We are," Ethan said. "And family is exactly why the review matters." Claudia held his gaze for a moment, then smiled again. Softer, this time, the smile she reserved for moments when she was changing strategy in real time. "Of course," she said. "Of course it does." She turned slightly toward Nora. "I keep meaning to tell you, you've made a real difference in this house. The way things run now. Douglas says you're exceptional." Nora met her eyes. "That's very kind. Where did you work before?" Claudia said it lightly, the question wrapped in the tone of conversation rather than interrogation. "A family in Pasadena," Nora said. This was the background Patricia had constructed for her. Verifiable at 1 layer, thin at 2 layers, designed to deflect the kind of casual curiosity that was not really casual. Before that, overseas for a few years. "Overseas," Claudia repeated with the specific quality of someone tasting a word to see if it rang true. "How interesting. You must have seen a great deal." "Some," Nora said. Claudia held her gaze a moment longer than the exchange required. Then she turned back to Ethan, and the conversation moved on. And Nora kept her breathing steady, and her face pleasant, and her hands still at her sides. She thought, "She's testing me. She doesn't know what I am yet, but she knows I'm something." She thought, 48 hours, maybe less. At 4:15, Claudia left. Ethan walked her out to her car, and Nora moved quickly through the sitting room, clearing the tea service. And on the way past the entry table, she noticed that Claudia's handbag had left a brief indentation in the paper beside the hallway telephone, a notepad that Douglas kept there for messages. The top sheet had been removed. It had been there when Claudia arrived. Nora had passed it twice. Now it was gone. She looked at the bare notepad. The second sheet had ghost impressions on it. Nora photographed it without touching it. She could enhance the image later or send it to the lab, but even at a glance, standing in the entry hall light, she could see the indentations of two words that had been written above and pressed through. They were, if she was reading them correctly, Nora Castillo, her own name. Written by Claudia in this house, this afternoon, and taken. Nora stood in the entry hall for a moment while the front door opened and Ethan came back inside, and she turned away from the notepad and toward the kitchen with the tea tray balanced in her hands. And she thought, the 72 hours I asked Patricia for, I don't have them. Ethan passed her in the hallway without speaking, moving back toward the study, his face carrying the specific weight of a man who had just sat through a performance and not been entirely taken in by it. In the kitchen, Lily had fallen asleep on the floor beside the measuring cups, all four of them still stacked, the tower intact. Nora set the tray down very carefully so as not to wake her, and then she stood at the kitchen window and looked at her own reflection in the darkening glass and tried to calculate how many moves she had left before Claudia made hers. The answer, she thought, was not enough, but not yet zero. She had one thing Claudia didn't know she had. Claudia thought Nora was a variable she hadn't yet identified. She didn't know Nora had already read her. And there was a window, narrow, closing, but still open, in which that gap could be used. Nora looked at Lily sleeping on the floor. She thought about what it would cost to move faster than her parameters allowed. She thought about what it would cost not to. She picked up the encrypted phone and sent Patricia a third message. She knows my name. She's building something. I need access to the East Wing study safe and whatever's in it before she gets there first. Can you get me the combination from the estate attorney's sealed file? She waited. Patricia replied in 4 minutes, 7 digits prefaced by a single line. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the board moves with or without you. Nora looked at the 7 digits. Then she looked at the East Wing hallway through the kitchen door, dark now except for the strip of light from Ethan's study. Tomorrow morning. She had one night. The woman behind the apron. She waited until 1 in the morning. The house had been asleep since 11, or almost. The light under Ethan's study door had stayed on until 12:40. Which was, by her observation, late, even for him. She'd sat on the edge of the cot in her room off the kitchen, with the notepad open on her lap and the encrypted phone face up beside her, tracking the light through the gap under the connecting door, the way sailors tracked weather. When it finally went off, she gave it 40 minutes. At 12:45, Lily stirred and resettled. At 12:51, Nora laced her shoes back up and went into the main house. The East Wing study safe was behind the bookshelves on the north wall, behind a copy of Marcus's firm's 10-year anniversary compilation that no one had taken off the shelf in the 6 months she had been observing it. She found it in 40 seconds, which was longer than she liked, but acceptable. She entered the 7 digits Patricia had given her, and the mechanism disengaged with a sound she kept small by pressing the door open gently by feel. The safe held what safes in houses like this one tended to hold: a passport, 2 sets of property deeds, a sealed envelope marked Attorney, Gerald Whitman Hayes Family Trust, open only, by Ethan A. Hayes, a USB drive labeled in permanent marker MH/personal, and a manila folder. The initials on the USB drive were Marcus Hayes. She photographed the drive without touching it, photographed the sealed envelope, and then opened the folder. Inside were financial statements. Not Hayes Capital's official reports. Those were public, and she had already analyzed them. These were internal allocation documents, handwritten tallies cross-referenced against account numbers. 3 years of them, ending 8 months after Marcus died. The handwriting was not Ethan's. She had seen enough of Ethan's handwriting in the notepads he left in the study, small, angular, economical, to know that this was someone else's. Someone with a rounder hand and a habit of underlining. She photographed every page. Then she noticed, tucked beneath the last statement at the very back of the folder, a single sheet of paper that was different from the others. Not a financial document. A note. Handwritten on Hayes capital letterhead, addressed to no one. Signed at the bottom by Marcus Hayes in the same round hand as the financial statements. She read it standing in the dark study with the safe door open beside her, reading by the narrow beam of the small flashlight she kept clipped to the inside of her apron. And what she read reorganized certain things she thought she had understood. Marcus had known. Not everything, but enough. He had known that the Meridian accounts were being mishandled. He had known that money designated as Ethan's trust had been redirected through a series of sub-accounts that Claudia controlled as co-signatory. He had written it down in that careful round hand with dates and account numbers and a note at the bottom that read, "If something happens to me, this goes to E. He'll know what to do with it. Don't let Claudia get to this first." Marcus Hayes had died 14 months ago of what the coroner called a cardiac event. Nora stood in the dark and breathed. She had come into this house looking for evidence of financial fraud. She had found it, and underneath it something that the board hadn't known to ask her to look for. Something that changed the shape of everything. If Marcus had known and had been trying to protect Ethan, and if Marcus had died before he could, then what had happened to Marcus was not incidental. It was the same plan run a first time, and it had worked. She photographed the note. She put everything back exactly as she had found it. She closed the safe, reset the combination, replaced the anniversary compilation on the shelf. She stood in the middle of the study for a moment in the dark, thinking about Marcus Hayes and the round handwriting and the 14 months between his death and this moment. And then she stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it was not the next move. And the next move was all she had. She was back in the kitchen at 1:47. She made herself drink a glass of water and eat something, crackers from the cabinet, because that was what was close, and she sat at the kitchen table and laid out what she had in the clearest terms she could manage. Claudia had killed Marcus to prevent him from exposing the financial fraud. She was now attempting to kill Ethan for the same reason. She had prepared a contingency, the file with Nora's name on it, to use as a redirect if the death attracted scrutiny. She knew Nora was not what she appeared to be, though she did not yet know what Nora actually was. Nora had the photographs of the financial documents and Marcus's note. This was the core evidence. It implicated Claudia in the fraud, and, by the logic of the note, suggested Claudia's knowledge of Marcus's discovery, which was a significant step toward connecting her to his death. It was not enough. Not yet. What she had would support a fraud prosecution and trigger a deeper investigation into Marcus's death. But what she needed for the board to move fast enough to protect Ethan before Claudia found another method, was something that tied Claudia directly to the warfarin in the glass. And for that, she needed whatever Claudia had prepared to lay the blame on Nora. She needed to find the file before Claudia used it. She went to sleep at 2:30 with this problem still open, and she was up again at 5:45 when Lily woke, and she went through the morning in the ordinary rhythms of the household, with the problem running underneath everything she did, like a current beneath still water. She was in the East Wing corridor at 9:15, arms full of fresh towels, when Claudia arrived, unannounced again. No call to Douglas. The front gate code had been given to Claudia by someone at some point, and she used it at her discretion, and the house absorbed her the way it absorbed any irregularity that had been occurring long enough to seem normal. Nora heard her voice in the entry hall and sorted her options in approximately 4 seconds. She could go back the way she had come and avoid the encounter entirely. She could continue on her current path and let the encounter happen on her terms. Or she could find a third position. She continued on her path. Claudia was in the east hallway before Nora reached the end of it, moving toward Ethan's study with the purposeful ease of someone who had a reason to be there that she hadn't shared with anyone. She stopped when she saw Nora. "Good morning," Nora said, and shifted the towels to make the arrangement look more natural. Claudia's smile arrived with a slight delay that to most people would have been imperceptible. "Good morning. Is Ethan in?" "He left for a meeting at 8:30. I don't believe he's expected back until this afternoon." Claudia processed this. She was very good at processing things without appearing to, which Nora recognized as a trained skill rather than a natural one. "Of course, I was hoping to catch him." She paused with the quality of a pause that has been prepared in advance. "Actually, Nora, do you have a moment?" Nora looked at her. "Of course." They did not go to the sitting room, which would have meant involving Douglas or Marta or anyone who happened to pass. Claudia led her with the confidence of the house's de facto authority to the small library on the East Wing's ground floor. A room Nora had cleaned many times, a room with a single window that looked out over the side garden. And no cameras, because the estate's camera system she had established in her first week did not cover interior rooms. Claudia sat down in one of the leather chairs near the window, and Nora stood, and the geometry of the thing said exactly what it was intended to say. "I'll be direct with you," Claudia said. "I think you'd appreciate that." "I would," Nora said. "You're not an ordinary household employee." She said it without accusation, without heat, just the flat delivery of a woman stating what she considered established fact. "I don't know exactly what you are, but I have some ideas. And I want you to know that whatever arrangement you've made with whoever sent you into this house, I'm in a position to offer you something considerably more valuable." Nora held her expression steady. "I'm not sure I know what you mean." Claudia smiled. It was a different smile than the others, smaller, more precise. The smile reserved for conversations where both parties knew what was actually being discussed. "I think you do. I'm not asking you to confirm anything. I'm asking you to listen." She folded her hands in her lap. "Ethan is not the person you think he is. He's paranoid, he's destructive, and he has spent the last 18 months systematically dismantling the legacy his brother and I built together. Marcus believed in stewardship, in protecting what the family had built. Ethan believes in burning it down to prove a point." She paused. "The people who sent you in here have their own interests, and those interests are not necessarily yours. I can make things very comfortable for you, very secure, if you choose to step back and let the natural course of things proceed." The natural course of things. A man drinking what he poured at the end of the day. A coroner's finding. A family tragedy. Nora let 2 seconds pass. She kept her face at the specific level of neutral that read as consideration rather than refusal. What exactly would stepping back look like? Leaving things where they are? Claudia's tone remained measured, almost gentle. Not pursuing certain lines of inquiry. Making sure that certain information doesn't reach certain people. She tilted her head slightly. "I'm not asking for anything difficult. I'm asking for discretion. And in exchange? A considerable sum deposited to an account of your choosing. Enough to give you and your daughter a very stable next several years." She let that sit. "I know what it's like to raise a child without security. Lily deserves a mother who doesn't have to take jobs like this one." Lily's name again. The same name she'd used in the kitchen 2 nights ago, with the same quality of familiarity applied to something she had no natural reason to know. Nora looked at her for a moment. "That's a generous offer," she said. "It is. I'll need some time to think about it." Claudia's eyes moved across Nora's face with the attention of someone reading a text they're not quite sure is in a language they speak. "Of course," she said after a moment. "Take until tomorrow morning. But Nora, I would encourage you not to take longer than that. Things move quickly in houses like this one. You'd want to be on the right side before they start moving." She stood, smoothed her jacket, and moved toward the door with the same purposeful ease she'd arrived with. At the doorway, she stopped without turning around. "One other thing," she said. "The broken glass from 2 nights ago? I understand it was an accident, your daughter being where she shouldn't be. It won't cause any problems." She said it with the specific warmth of someone doing a favor. "As long as things are handled the way I've described." She knew about the glass. She knew it had been broken, and she was telling Nora she knew, wrapping the knowledge in concern the way you wrapped a warning in courtesy, to make it land without leaving marks. Which meant she knew Nora had swept it up. Which meant she was wondering, or more than wondering, what Nora had done with it. Claudia left. Nora stood in the library for a moment after the footsteps receded and let herself feel the shape of the position she was in. Claudia testing her. Claudia knowing more than was safe. The timeline compressing from all sides. She looked at the window and the garden beyond it. Very ordinary in the silver, mid-morning light. A bird moved through the hedge. The fountain in the center of the garden ran quietly. She went back to work. At 11, Ethan came home 40 minutes earlier than Douglas had said he would, and he came through the kitchen door instead of the front, which was unusual. And he stopped short when he found Nora at the kitchen table with Lily's lunch half prepared in front of her. He looked at her in a way he hadn't looked at her before, not the managed, recalibrated gaze she'd cataloged. Something more direct. He was still in his jacket, but he'd loosened his tie, which he did when he was operating slightly outside of formality rather than inside of it. "Claudia was here," he said, not a question. "She came by this morning," Nora said. "You'd already left." "What did she want?" Nora looked at him. He was looking at her in the way that some people looked when they were done with the version of a conversation that pretended to be about something else and wanted to get to the real one. She understood the impulse. She had the same one most of the time. "She wanted to talk," Nora said. "She had things she wanted to say." "To you specifically?" A pause. "Not to Douglas?" "To me, specifically." He was quiet for a moment. Lily across the table was pulling the crust off a bread slice with careful fingers, uninterested in the conversation and entirely focused on her project. "Nora," he said, and the way he said her name was different from how he'd said it before. Not the name of a staff member, not a summons, but the name of a person he was trying to locate in a space that kept shifting on him. "Who are you?" The question she had known was coming. The question she had prepared 17 different answers for, and none of them were right. Lily looked up from her bread crust. She looked at Ethan, then at Nora, with the particular attention of a 2-year-old, tracking the emotional weather in a room. "That's complicated," Nora said. "I imagine it is." He didn't move from the doorway. "But I'd like to know." Nora put down the knife she'd been holding. She looked at him at the way he was standing, the way the line of tension through his shoulders wasn't aggression, but something more careful, something that was trying very hard to stay that way. And she thought about the sealed envelope in the safe with his name on it, and the note in Marcus's round handwriting, and the 14 months between then and now. She thought about what he deserved to know, and in what order. She thought about the warfarin. "I will tell you," she said. "I need you to let me pick the moment and the order. Not because I'm hiding something from you, because the order matters. And if I give it to you wrong, there are people in this house who will be hurt by it before it can be stopped." He looked at her for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the road beyond the gate, and the sound arrived and receded and left the house quiet again. "One day," he said. "You have one day." Lily held up a piece of bread crust in his direction, offering it with the seriousness of a diplomat presenting credentials. He looked at it. Something moved through his face, that same motion from the study 2 nights ago, the thing between amusement and its absence. He didn't take the bread, but he didn't leave the kitchen either. He moved to the counter, poured himself a glass of water from the tap, not from the filtered pitcher on the bar cart. The tap, as though his body had been making decisions his mind hadn't consciously caught up with. And stood there, and drank it, while Lily ate her lunch and Nora finished preparing it. "Okay," he said finally. He set the glass down. "One day." He left. Lily put her bread crust down and looked at the door through which he had just gone, and then looked at Nora and made the specific face she made when she thought something that had been happening should keep happening. "I know," Nora said. She cleaned up the lunch things and thought about what Claudia had said in the library. Things move quickly in houses like this one. You'd want to be on the right side before they start moving. She thought about the file she hadn't found yet, the one with her name on it. It was somewhere in this house. And Claudia's visit this morning, unannounced, purposeful ending with a deadline, told Nora that the timeline she'd been managing had just been handed a different deadline than the one she'd negotiated with Patricia. Tomorrow morning. That's what Claudia had said. Take until tomorrow morning. Nora thought about what that meant in terms of what Claudia was planning to do tomorrow morning, and what Nora needed to have in her hands before then. She looked at the East Wing hallway. She looked at the safe she'd already been inside. Then she looked at the rooms she hadn't been inside yet. Claudia had come today with a purpose. She hadn't gone to see Ethan. She had known Ethan wasn't there, which meant she had come here to see the house, to check something, or to place something. Nora stood still. Claudia had been in this house for 40 minutes this morning, in which time she had spoken to Nora in the library for 15. That left 25 minutes unaccounted for. 25 minutes inside the house while Ethan was out and Nora was in the East Wing corridor. She thought about where a person would go in this house in 25 unobserved minutes if they were placing something rather than retrieving it. Somewhere, Ethan would find it. Somewhere, it would look like it had been there for a while. She went to the guest suite. She didn't find it in the guest suite. She found it in the second guest suite, behind the mirror in the space between the mirror and the wall, where someone who knew this house intimately, who had grown up in it, who had come to it as Marcus's wife and learned every room of it, the way you learned the rooms of things you planned to keep, would know there was a gap wide enough to hold a folder. The folder was there. Nora pulled it out. She held it in both hands and breathed for a moment, and then she opened it. It had her name on the cover, Nora Castillo. Below that, a typed header, Private Investigator Retained by Ethan A. Hayes. Purpose, Evidence Fabrication against C.M. Hayes. She read through it, standing in the guest suite, with the afternoon light going gray through the window. It was meticulous. Photographs of her that had been taken without her knowledge inside the house outside the gate, once at the coffee shop 2 miles away where she went on her days off, and annotated with false captions. A narrative that described Nora as a operative hired by Ethan to manufacture evidence against Claudia, as part of his effort to strip her of control over the trust. Fabricated communications between Nora and Ethan. A financial trail that showed payments from a shell account to a name that matched one of Nora's former cover identities. If this file surfaced when Claudia intended it to surface, which was tomorrow morning, after whatever she had planned for tonight, Nora would not just be exposed. She would be the story. Ethan would be the villain retaliating against a grieving widow. Claudia would be the victim. And whatever had happened to Ethan would be Nora's fault. Nora stood in the empty guest suite and looked at the folder and felt the thing she had been keeping in its compartment all day move briefly out of it. Not fear, not quite. Closer to the feeling of the game changing around you faster than your preparations accounted for. She photographed every page. Then she put the folder back exactly where she'd found it, behind the mirror, in the gap. She needed Claudia to believe the folder was still hidden, still her insurance policy, still her exit route. She needed Claudia to make her move tomorrow morning, whatever that move was, believing she was in control. Because the moment Claudia moved, Nora would be ready. She went back to the kitchen. She picked up Lily, who had finished her lunch and wanted to be picked up, which Nora knew because Lily had crossed the kitchen and was standing directly behind her legs, making the small, specific sound that meant, "I am here and I want your attention immediately." Nora picked her up and held her and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the side garden, where the fountain was still running, and the hedge was still ordinary, and the bird had long since moved on. "Tomorrow," she said to the window, to herself, to neither of them specifically. Tomorrow. She would need everything she had photographed, the lab analysis, Marcus's note, and Claudia's folder. Not to prove Claudia's guilt, because the financial evidence and the warfarin established that. She would need them to prove Claudia's contingency plan, to make visible the architecture of the frame that had been built around Nora before Claudia could activate it. The metadata on that folder. That was what mattered. When the file had been created, when the photographs had been taken, when the communications had been fabricated. If the timestamps preceded the glass incident, if Claudia had begun building the false narrative before Ethan's drink was even prepared, then the preparation itself was the evidence. You did not build a frame for someone you planned to blame for an accident before the accident had occurred, unless the accident was something you had planned. She looked at Lily's face, close and warm, and utterly unconcerned with any of this. "You knocked over the right glass," she said. Lily reached up and patted Nora's cheek with one hand, which meant, "I know. Also, I want a snack." The file with her name on it. She waited until Claudia made her move, because Claudia was the kind of person whose plans required an audience and an occasion, and the occasion she had chosen was the board's routine check-in meeting held monthly at Hayes Capital's Newport Beach office, attended by Ethan and 3 board members that Patricia had flagged as occurring at 9 the next morning. Nora knew this because Patricia had sent her the meeting calendar and the initial briefing materials, and Nora had read those materials 7 times on the plane coming over. She knew where Ethan would be at 9 in the morning. She knew who else would be in that room. What she hadn't known until now was that Claudia intended to walk into that meeting. She found out at 6:45 in the morning when Douglas came to the kitchen with the look of a man carrying information he hadn't been asked to carry and wasn't sure he should be. He told Nora, in the careful way he had of telling her things, that Mrs. Hayes had called ahead to let him know she would be stopping by the estate at 8 to retrieve a document she had left during her previous visit. Nora absorbed this. Did she specify which document? Douglas had not been told, and his expression said that he had not asked because Douglas was a man who managed his exposure to the family's internal dynamics by staying precisely at the boundary of what his job required and no further. "Thank you, Douglas," Nora said. She sent Patricia a message at 6:52. "She's moving this morning, 8 a.m. at the estate, then presumably the board meeting at 9. She's going to retrieve the folder and use it before I can counter it. I need the board meeting delayed by 40 minutes, long enough for me to present the alternative documentation first. Can you arrange it?" Patricia's reply came in 6 minutes. "I can push the meeting to 9:40 on a pretext. That's everything I can give you. Don't come in empty-handed." She would not come in empty-handed. She had until 8 o'clock. She spent the hour before Claudia arrived in the kitchen with Lily, going through the photographs on her encrypted phone, financial documents, Marcus's note, the warfarin analysis, the metadata she had requested and received from Dr. Reeves's lab at 5 in the morning after sending him the image of the folder's contents. He had run the document metadata on the fabricated communications and the photographs within the folder. The fabricated communications had been created 17 days ago. The photographs of Nora, taken inside the house showing her in rooms and corridors, had been taken in the 11 days before she arrived, using images from the estate's security camera system that Claudia had accessed through the administrative portal. 17 days ago, before the glass incident, before Lily had knocked anything over, before the warfarin had been placed in the bourbon, before there was any incident to blame on Nora. Claudia had built the frame first. She had planned the death second. She had placed the blame third in that order, which meant this had never been impulsive. It was the second run of a plan that had already worked once on Marcus. Nora compiled everything into a sequence. The financial documents with dates, Marcus's note with its account numbers, the warfarin analysis with the lab chain of custody, the folder metadata, in that order, each piece closing the gap between the one before it, building to the point where the only available conclusion was the one the facts demanded. She put Lily's breakfast in front of her at 7:15. At 7:58, the gate intercom sounded. At 8:03, Claudia Hayes walked into the entry hall of the estate, wearing a dark wool coat and the expression of a woman running slightly ahead of schedule, which was the expression of a woman who believed she was still in control of the pace. Douglas received her. Nora was in the East Wing corridor. She listened to Claudia move through the house, toward the guest suite, away from Douglas's line of sight. The sound of the guest suite door opening, then a brief pause, the length of time it took to lift a mirror and reach behind it, and then another pause, slightly longer that had a different quality. Nora started walking. She reached the guest suite doorway at the moment Claudia turned around, folder in hand. They stood in the doorway and the middle of the room respectively, looking at each other, with the mirror still slightly off-center on the wall behind Claudia, and the folder open in her hands showing the top page, Nora Castillo. The silence lasted 4 seconds, which was long enough for Claudia to run the calculation of what it meant that Nora was here, that Nora knew about the folder, that Nora was standing in the doorway rather than absent or oblivious. "I see," Claudia said. "You should know that I've photographed every page," Nora said, "along with the metadata, which shows creation dates. The board meeting has been moved to 9:40. I intend to be there." Claudia looked at her with the expression of someone whose plan has shifted from its course and who is in real time assessing the new landscape. "You've been busy," she said. She said it without anger, with the tone of an assessment rather than an accusation. "I have," Nora said. "So have you. The Meridian accounts, the warfarin, Marcus's note?" She held Claudia's gaze. "He wrote it down, Claudia. He knew about the accounts, and he wrote it down, and he put it in the safe for Ethan to find. The note is dated 6 weeks before he died." Something moved through Claudia's face. Not guilt, she was too composed for guilt to arrive cleanly, but something close to it, something that had been very carefully managed for a long time, and was feeling for the first time the pressure of the management slipping. "You have no idea what Marcus understood, or what he intended. I have his handwriting and his account numbers and the words, 'if something happens to me,'" Nora said. "I have a lab analysis of the compound that was in the glass in Ethan's study 4 nights ago. I have financial statements that cross-reference with 3 years of misallocated trust funds." She paused. "What I also have is every page of the file you just picked up with metadata that proves it was built before any incident occurred that you could credibly blame on me, which means you weren't responding to a problem, you were creating one." Claudia was very still. "You can walk out of here with that folder," Nora said. "You can bring it to the board meeting and present it exactly the way you planned. But when you do, I'll present the metadata, and the board will see a file that was built to frame someone for a death that hadn't happened yet. That's not evidence of a crime I committed. That's evidence of a crime you were planning." The silence in the guest suite was the particular silence of a room where a strategy has just been fully exposed to its own light and found to have no shadow left to stand in. Claudia looked at the folder in her hands. She looked at Nora. She closed the folder. "You're very good at this," she said. "I know. Whoever sent you in here is going to take what you found and use it in ways that go beyond anything this family needs." Her voice had changed, thinner, now stripped of the warmth, the performance. What was underneath was not nothing. It was a woman who had genuinely at some point believed that what she was doing was protection rather than destruction. That conviction had curdled into something else over time, but the original shape of it was still there in her voice. Still thought it had the right to take up space. "Marcus and I spent 12 years building what this family has. Ethan would burn it." "Ethan almost died," Nora said. "In his own house, in his own study, 4 nights ago." "It wasn't—" Claudia stopped. "Wasn't what?" The pause was too long. Claudia's jaw set. "I need to leave," she said. "You can," Nora said. She stepped back from the doorway. But you should know that this morning's meeting will happen whether or not you attend it, and the documentation will be presented whether or not you're in the room." Claudia moved past her toward the hallway, folder in hand, coat perfectly in place, posture perfect, every external surface intact. She stopped at the end of the hallway. "Does Ethan know?" she asked, without turning around. "What you are?" "Not yet," Nora said. Claudia turned. She looked at Nora with something that was almost curiosity. The academic kind, stripped of personal investment. "When he finds out," she said, "he'll feel what I feel right now." She left. Her footsteps went down the hallway, through the entry, and out the front door, and then the gate intercom chimed once as her car passed through it, and the sound of the engine receded down the eucalyptus lane. Nora stood in the guest suite doorway. She had the documentation. She had the metadata. She had what she needed to bring to the board at 9:40 and lay out in the correct sequence with the correct evidence at each point. She had 37 minutes to get from the estate to the Hayes Capital offices. She had one problem. She turned and found Ethan standing at the far end of the hallway, in the suit he wore to board meetings, tie properly in place, watching her. He had come home. Not from the meeting he hadn't left for yet. From the East Wing, where he had apparently been for the last portion of the conversation she had just had with Claudia, or enough of it to have been standing there for longer than she'd known. His face was not blank, not the managed register she knew, something else. The look of a person who has been given information that reorganizes things that have been in the wrong position for a long time, and has not yet decided whether the reorganization is relief or devastation. "Patricia Shen works for the Hayes Capital Board," he said. "She runs fiduciary investigations through a third-party firm. I know who she is." He paused. "She didn't tell me you were here." Nora opened her mouth. "That's not an accusation," he said before she could speak. "I'm telling you what I know because you told me the order matters." His eyes moved to the folder she was holding the photographs on her phone, the documents she'd compiled. "You're not leaving for that meeting without me." She looked at him. "Ethan?" "My brother," he said. The word was quiet and direct, and landed the way words did when they'd been held for a very long time in a very small space. "The note in the safe. I found it 8 months ago, and I didn't know what to do with it because I didn't have the other pieces." He took a breath. "You have the other pieces." She had not accounted for this. She had accounted for many things, for Claudia's folder, for the metadata, for Patricia's pushed timeline, for the 40-minute window. She had not accounted for the version of this moment where Ethan already knew about the note and had been waiting in the particular way that careful, solitary people waited for someone to arrive with the rest of it. "Yes," she said. "I have the other pieces." He nodded. "Then we go together." He moved down the hallway toward the entry without waiting for her answer, and Nora stood for a moment in the guest suite doorway, with the folder and the photographs and the lab report, and 8 years of professional training to not let situations outrun their parameters. And she looked at the back of him moving away down the corridor, and felt the thing she had been keeping in its compartment make one more determined effort to leave it. She put it back. She went after him. In the kitchen, as they passed through it, Lily was sitting at the table with Marta, this morning's project apparently being the arrangement of dried beans by color, which was more advanced than pasta shapes and suggested escalating ambition. She looked up when Nora came through, and looked at Ethan, who had slowed at the kitchen door in the way he did now, not automatically, not managed, but with the specific attention of someone who had started noticing something and couldn't stop. Lily held up a red bean. Ethan looked at it. "That's a kidney bean," he said. Lily considered this information, decided it was acceptable, and put the bean in the red pile. Ethan looked at Nora. Something in his face had settled into a different arrangement. Not the weight she'd seen there before. Not the managed distance. Something that had more room in it than either of those. "Let's go," he said. They went. In the car, they did not talk about Claudia. They did not talk about Marcus. They did not talk about the folder or the warfarin or the 8 years of Nora's career that had brought her into this house, or the 23 days she had spent in it, learning the rhythms of his life from the negative space. 3 minutes from the Hayes Capital offices, Ethan said, "Lily's been in this house for 3 weeks." 23 days, Nora said. She knocked over the glass. "Yes." And the lamp in the east hallway. "The lamp was in the wrong place," Nora said. She was correct about that. He was quiet for a moment. "And the file box in the foyer?" "That one I'm less certain about." "She may just like the sound." He didn't smile, exactly, but something around the edges of his expression did a thing that had the same function. They pulled into the Hayes Capital parking structure at 9:31, 9 minutes before the board meeting was scheduled to begin. Claudia's Range Rover was already in the lot. Ethan looked at it. His face went back to what it was. "She'll have the folder," Nora said, "and she'll present it first if she can. I need you to get me in that room before she does." "I can do that." "And I need you not to react to what she says about me," Nora said. "Not until I've laid out the documentation in order. The order is everything." He looked at her. "I know what evidence requires," he said. "I've been trying to build a case against Claudia for 14 months. 14 months. Since Marcus died." She thought of the note in the safe, the round handwriting, "If something happens to me." She thought of Ethan, alone in this for over a year, with a piece of the puzzle and nowhere to put it, in a house that someone had been trying to take from his family for 3 years. "Okay," she said. "I'm aware," he said, and his voice had the quality of something being said for the last time in a particular register. The voice of a man who had been holding something together by himself for long enough that the arrival of another pair of hands was almost impossible to integrate. "That you didn't come into my house to help me. That you were there for the board. That Lily being there is a variable. I understand all of that. Ethan, I also understand that the glass," he said, "was 4 nights ago, and you've been inside Claudia's safe and her folder and her contingency plan, and you didn't have to do any of that to fulfill the assignment." She looked at him. "I'm not saying I'm not angry," he said, "about the deception. I am. I will be." He looked at the Range Rover. "I just also think you should know that I'm not only angry." She didn't answer. The silence had a weight to it that she was not going to resolve in a parking structure with 9 minutes before a board meeting. "The folder," she said instead, "and the documentation. In order." He got out of the car. She followed him. In the lobby, they split. He went ahead to the conference room while she stopped at the security desk and established access through Patricia's contact. She was inside the building in 4 minutes and moving down the corridor toward the conference room when she heard Claudia's voice from inside, already presenting. Already there, already going. She pushed the door open. The board, 3 members, plus the firm's general counsel and Patricia Shen, who had inserted herself at the table in the seat closest to the door, looked up. Claudia, standing at the head of the table with the folder open in front of her, turned. Nora set her phone on the table and said, "I need 10 minutes." Claudia looked at the folder. She looked at Nora. She looked at Ethan, who had taken the seat at the opposite head of the table and was watching all of it with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting a very long time for this room and these people and this morning. "Nora Castillo works for Ethan Hayes," Claudia said. "She was placed in this house to manufacture." "The folder in your hands was created 17 days ago," Nora said. "The board can verify this through the document metadata. That date is 11 days before the incident that the folder claims I was responsible for. If I was placed in the house to manufacture evidence against Claudia Hayes, that evidence was manufactured before any event occurred that would require a response, which makes it not a response. It makes it a plan." Silence. She laid out the documents, in order. The financial statements first, then the account numbers and the cross-references. Then Marcus's note, which she had photographed on high resolution and which she now displayed on the conference room screen through the projector Patricia's assistant had set up in the pushed-back time window. The note in Marcus Hayes's round handwriting with the date and the account numbers and the words, "The board could all see if something happens to me, this goes to E." Then the warfarin analysis. Then the metadata. The board did not speak while she presented. The general counsel made notes. Patricia watched Claudia with the specific attention of a woman who had spent 23 years watching people understand that something they had believed was their advantage had become something else entirely. Claudia stood at the head of the table. Her posture was perfect. Her coat was immaculate. Her hands, flat on the surface of the folder, were completely still. "I want an independent audit," Ethan said from his end of the table. "Immediate, full access to all Meridian subaccounts. All records connected to the trust for the period following my brother's death." "Ethan," Claudia began. "And I want a forensic review of Marcus's cardiac event," he said. 14 months ago I requested this and was declined. I'm not requesting, I'm directing it as controlling shareholder." His voice was level and direct, and had the quality of a decision that had been made a long time ago and was being voiced now for the first time because now there was something to voice it with. "This meeting is adjourned until the initial audit findings are available." The board members looked at each other with the expressions of people absorbing a significant reconfiguration and trying to determine the appropriate response, which they had not yet landed on. Claudia looked at Ethan, then at Nora. "This isn't over," she said. "No," Ethan agreed, "but it started." Claudia picked up the folder from the table. She walked out of the conference room with her coat and her posture and her performance intact, which was the thing about Claudia Hayes. The performance held, even when everything else was coming apart. That Nora had thought since the first time she saw it was either her greatest strength or the saddest thing about her. Possibly both. The door closed. The room exhaled. Patricia was already on her phone. The general counsel was pulling up something on his laptop. The board members had separated into their own conversations. Nora stood at the side of the table with her phone in her hand and the morning's work laid out in front of her. And the particular hollow feeling that came after the thing she'd been building toward had happened, not triumph, never quite that. More like the moment when a structure you've been holding up finally transfers its weight to the ground, and you can let your arms down. Ethan was watching her from across the table. She looked back. He had 17 things in his face at once. She could see them, could read them. Had spent 23 days learning to read this specific face, and she couldn't resolve them into anything simple. The anger he'd said he had. The other thing he'd said he also had. The weight of 14 months, now having somewhere to go. She was still holding the phone. "The independent audit will take time," she said. "I know. Claudia's lawyers will challenge the admissibility of the safe documents, possibly the lab analysis too. I know. It's not over in the way that today makes it feel like it's over," she said, because she needed him to understand this, and she didn't know how to say it any other way. "The legal process takes..." "Nora," he said. "I know." A pause. "I've been trying to bring her to account for 14 months. I understand what time something like this takes." He looked at the door through which Claudia had left. "What I didn't have was someone else who could see the whole board at once." His eyes came back to her. "Now I do." She didn't answer. Outside the conference room window, the Newport Beach morning was going bright, the marine layer burning off the sky, coming through in patches, the way it always did eventually. Her phone buzzed. Patricia. She looked at it without answering. Ethan was still watching her. "Go home," he said. I need time. With what you've shown me today. With Marcus's note." His voice moved in a way it hadn't moved before. Something working in the space between his ribs where he kept the things he didn't give to the room. "And I need to think about the rest of it. You and I. In that house." He looked at his hands on the table. "I'm not ready to do that in a conference room." She nodded. She picked up her phone and her documentation and walked out of the Hayes Capital conference room. And behind her, the board meeting resumed in some form, and Claudia Hayes drove south on the Coast Highway. with a folder that had already failed to do what she'd built it to do. And somewhere ahead of it all, the legal and forensic machinery of accountability began the long process of engaging. Nora walked through the lobby and out into the morning and sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Patricia. It was a number she didn't recognize, with a Newport Beach area code, and the message said, "There's a second set of Meridian documents. Claudia has them. If she gets to her attorney before the audit freezes her accounts, they'll disappear. You have maybe 2 hours." She stared at the message. Unknown sender. Unverified. Could be Claudia's move, bait, misdirection, a way to pull Nora off course. Could be legitimate. She forwarded it to Patricia with a single line, "Verify sender and content. Do not act until confirmed." Then she started the car and drove back toward the estate. And behind her, the Hayes Capitol building caught the morning sun in its glass face and held it the way all glass held things clearly, briefly, before the angle shifted. There was still a second set of documents in the world, either real or invented. Claudia was still moving, even now, even with the folder and the metadata and the board behind Nora. The legal machinery had started but had not yet engaged its full weight. And Ethan Hayes was in a conference room with 14 months of unresolved grief and the morning's evidence, and something in his face that he had not yet had words for. None of this was over. It had started. What Lily started, Nora will finish. The text from the unknown number proved to be neither bait nor misdirection. Patricia confirmed the sender at 11:43. A former junior accountant at the fiduciary firm that had managed the Meridian accounts. A man named Torres, who had processed the sub-account transfers under Claudia's direction 2 years ago, and had spent the intervening period in the specific category of discomfort that came from knowing something and being afraid of the person who knew you knew it. Torres had kept copies. Paper copies, the old-fashioned kind, stored in a lockbox at a bank in Irvine, rather than any digital system. He had been watching the morning's events unfold through some channel Nora didn't fully understand. Word moved in the fiduciary world the way it moved in all small professional worlds, quickly and selectively. And he had decided that the morning's events suggested the wind was changing direction. Nora drove to Irvine. She had not planned to drive to Irvine. She had planned to go back to the estate, collect her daughter, sit in the kitchen, and wait for the next move. She had not planned to be making new moves herself. Not today. Not after the conference room. But the legal freeze Patricia had requested through the board would not take effect until the audit filing was complete, which would not be complete until late afternoon at the earliest. And if Claudia understood what the morning meant, and Claudia was not a woman who misunderstood things, not in the ways that mattered, then she would understand that the window to move money and documents was narrowing by the hour. Patricia called while Nora was on the freeway. "You cannot legally compel Torres to produce those documents," she said. "He's a voluntary source. If he decides to go back to Claudia, he won't," Nora said. "He's already decided. I just need to be there before he undecides." "That's not a word." "I know." She arrived at the bank in Irvine at 12:21. Torres was a thin man in his mid-30s who met her in the parking lot with the look of someone who had made a decision and was now discovering what it felt like to live in the aftermath of it. Not regret, exactly, but the post-decision shakiness of a person who has spent a long time not deciding and is now in the unfamiliar territory of having moved. He produced the lockbox documents in a bank meeting room in the presence of the branch manager, which Torres had arranged in advance because he was underneath everything a careful man who had learned his carefulness from the wrong person. Nora photographed every page, signed the voluntary disclosure form that Patricia had transmitted to the branch manager, and shook Torres's hand. "You should know," she said, "that what you've done today may be used in a prosecution." "I know," he said. "And you should speak to an attorney before—" "I already have one," Torres said with the quiet dignity of someone who has been planning this for longer than the morning's events suggested. "I made the appointment 2 weeks ago. I just didn't know if I was going to need it." She left the bank at 12:48. She called Patricia from the car. "I have the second set. Torres is a cooperative witness. His attorney has been retained for 2 weeks, which means this has been building longer than today." She paused at the freeway on-ramp. How quickly can the audit freeze move? With what Torres has produced immediately. A pause. "Nora, this is..." Patricia, who did not easily arrive at the outer limits of her professional composure, had arrived there. "This is considerably more than we were engaged to find." "I know. This is going to implicate Claudia Hayes in Marcus Hayes's death." "I know. The forensic review of the cardiac event will find what it finds," Nora said. "That's not my case to build. That's the investigators who come after. My case was the fraud and the attempt on Ethan. I have both." A pause. "Yes," Patricia said. "You do." Nora drove. She was back at the estate by 1:35. Lily was asleep. Marta was making soup. The house was doing what houses did when their official inhabitants were elsewhere, going quiet and careful, in the particular way of places that absorbed whatever was done in them and held it. Nora went to the small room off the kitchen and sat on the cot and looked at the wall for a moment, letting the morning settle into its actual shape. She had been running on operational forward momentum since before dawn, and now the momentum had transferred, and she was what was left. A woman in a room who had done the job and was now sitting with the fact of having done it, and everything that meant. She thought about Ethan in the conference room. She thought about what he had said in the parking structure. "I'm not only angry." She thought about it with the particular care she applied to things she had been keeping in their compartments all day, because compartments were useful until they weren't, and this one had been pressing at its seams since the study, since the kitchen, since 3 weeks of a house and its rhythms, and a man who ate dinner at his desk and read physical newspapers, and had looked at Lily on the kitchen floor with a 2-cup measuring tower between them, and said with more accuracy than he probably knew, "She's deliberate." She was sitting there in the small room when she heard the front gate chime. She looked at her watch. 2:14. She went to the kitchen window. Ethan's car was coming up the eucalyptus drive. She watched it stop in the motor court and watched him get out, jacket off, now left in the car, tie loosened, the post-meeting version of him that she had seen twice before when the formality had cost something and the body recorded the cost. He stood in the motor court for a moment looking at the house before he came in, which she hadn't seen him do before. She moved back from the window. He came through the front door. She heard it. She heard his footsteps in the entry hall, then in the main corridor, then slowing near the kitchen. He stopped. "Marta," he said. "Where's Nora?" "Small room?" Marta said. "She's been there about 20 minutes. His footsteps came to the kitchen door. He stopped again. She could hear him standing in the doorway. "You drove to Irvine," he said. "Patricia told you." "Patricia tells me considerably more than most people think she does," he said. "It's why I've been paying her retainer for 3 years." Nora turned around. He was in the doorway looking at her in the way that had started in the conference room and had not fully resolved all 17 things still there slightly differently arranged by the intervening hour. "You were paying Patricia's firm," she said. "Quietly, through a third party." He moved into the small room and sat down in the chair that Lily used for story time, which was the only other seat available, and which looked in this context somewhat undersized for him. "I found the note in Marcus's safe 8 months ago. I knew there was money missing. I'd suspected it for longer, but everything I put together was circumstantial, and the board at the time was still largely under Claudia's social influence, and anything I said in that room sounded like a grieving brother trying to make a conspiracy out of a cardiac event." He looked at his hands. "So I put someone in from outside, someone who didn't have my name attached to them." Nora let this settle. "You didn't know it would be me specifically?" she said. "Patricia chose you. She told me she had someone good. She didn't give me a name." He looked up. "She also didn't tell me you'd bring your daughter." "That wasn't the original plan," Nora said. "My regular childcare fell through the week before the assignment started. I made a judgment call." "Your judgment call saved my life," he said. The room was very quiet. Through the wall, they could hear Marta moving in the kitchen, the gentle percussion of the midday soup routine. Outside the window, the afternoon had cleared to the specific clarity that came after Marine Layer burned off everything sharp and blue and slightly too bright. "The case against Claudia is solid," Nora said, because she needed to say something, and what they were getting close to was not something she knew how to do at the speed of a parking structure or a kitchen or a room that Lily used for story time. The second set of documents Torres produced fills the evidentiary gap. The metadata on the fabricated folder establishes premeditation. The warfarin analysis connects the physical attempt to the larger pattern. The forensic review of Marcus's event will be, "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to—" "I know," he said again. He said it the way he'd said it in the conference room. Not dismissal, not shortcut. The particular, "I know" of someone who has understood for a moment and needs the other person to understand that they have understood. "I'm not asking you to brief me on the case." She looked at him. He looked back. "Patricia said you were the best she'd placed," he said. "That you were precise and you didn't compromise. And you kept your assignments separate from yourself in a way that most people couldn't manage." He paused. "She also said you'd had a hard time on a previous job. That someone you trusted had—" "That's not relevant to this assignment," Nora said. "No," he agreed. "It's relevant to you." He held her gaze. "Which, I've been told, is a different category, and I'm beginning to understand why the distinction matters." She breathed. "You had a plan," he said. "You had parameters. You had a timeline and a sequence and a professional obligation that didn't include any of what actually happened. And you're sitting in this room in my house at 2 in the afternoon, on the other side of all of it, and you look like someone who doesn't know what to do with the next part." She didn't answer. "I don't either," he said, "in case that helps." It was not by any objective measure a declaration. It was a statement of shared location, two people on the same unfamiliar ground named as such. It was the kind of thing that was Nora understood as much as he could offer from where he was standing. And it was more than she had expected. And that more was doing something significant in her chest. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About the assignment. About what I was actually sent to find. And what I found instead. And the order in which those things happened." "All right." The board hired Patricia's firm to investigate financial irregularities in the Meridian accounts. That was the assignment. Evidence of fraud, documentation of misappropriated trust funds. I came into this house to find paper trails. She paused. "I didn't come in here expecting to find what I found. Marcus's note changes the scope of everything. The warfarin changes the scope of everything. I made calls about the timeline, about holding back information, about staying in place that were not within my operational parameters. Some of those calls put you at risk." "Which calls?" he said. He was not asking to condemn, he was asking because he was a man who needed the specific facts. "The 24 hours after I sent the glass fragments for analysis," she said. "I asked Patricia to hold off on moving the board. I told myself it was to protect the investigation, to keep Claudia from knowing the net was closing. That was part of it. The other part was that I hadn't found everything yet, and I wanted to be the one who found it." She held his gaze. "I wanted to finish it. That's not purely professional. That's personal preference wearing professional clothes, and it carried a risk I didn't account for fully." He was quiet for a moment. "What was the risk?" "That you might have poured another glass before the analysis came back." He looked at her. The room was quiet. "But I didn't," he said. "No. And the analysis came back in 18 hours instead of 24. "Yes." "And we're here," he said. She looked at him, at the exhaustion in his face and the other thing underneath it. The thing that had been there since the parking structure, since the kitchen, since probably longer than she was fully willing to account for. "We're here," she said. "Then we're working with what is," he said. "Not what the parameters specified." She almost smiled. Not quite. He reached into his jacket pocket. He'd brought the jacket after all, held it over one arm, and produced a folded piece of paper. He set it on the edge of the cot between them. She looked at it without picking it up. "Marcus's note," he said. "The original. I had it copied before the board meeting, gave the copy to General Counsel as evidence, kept the original." He looked at the paper. "He wrote it 6 weeks before he died. I've read it so many times I could recite it. But I never—" He stopped. "I never had someone to read it with, who understood what it meant. Not just legally, what it meant." She picked it up. She unfolded it carefully. The paper was older than she'd expected, softer at the creases, the way paper got when it had been folded and unfolded many times. She read it in the afternoon light, slowly, even though she had read her photograph of it a dozen times. Marcus's round handwriting. The account numbers neat and careful. The dates. The single sentence in the middle of the second paragraph that said, "He's been trying to do the right thing for 3 years, and nobody will let him." And at the bottom, the line she had photographed and thought about and put in her sequence. "If something happens to me, this goes to E. He'll know what to do with it." She folded it back along its existing creases. "He was right," she said. Ethan looked at her. "About what?" "About you knowing what to do with it." He was quiet. Something moved in his face, slow, the way things moved when they'd been stopped for a long time and had finally found the gap through which they could go. She watched it happen. She did not look away. "He also wrote," Ethan said, "at the very top, the first line, before the account numbers. I didn't include it in the board presentation because it's not evidentiary." She thought about the photograph on her phone. She had read the note completely. She thought of the first line. She had read it and moved past it because it hadn't been relevant to the evidence chain. But she had read it, and now that she thought about it, "He said," Ethan said quietly, "that he was sorry he wouldn't be there to introduce us." She looked at him. He looked at her. The afternoon held bright and quiet. "That's—" She stopped. She tried again. "He wrote that before he died. 6 weeks before." A pause. "I spent a long time thinking it didn't mean anything specific, that it was just Marcus being Marcus. He was always saying things that turned out to mean more than they appeared to." He looked at the folded paper in her hands. "And then you came into my house." She held the paper. Outside, a sound from the kitchen Lily awake the small sequence of sounds that meant she was climbing out of the travel cot and would be in the kitchen doorway in approximately 90 seconds. "I need to tell you something else," Nora said. "All right?" "I'm going to submit my final report to Patricia at the end of this week. The board will have everything they need to proceed. After that," she stopped, "the assignment ends. What I am in this house ends." He looked at her. "What happens to what you actually are? That's something I haven't figured out yet." "Okay," he said. She frowned at him slightly. "I'm being serious." "I know," he said. "Okay means I heard you, and I'm not asking you to have figured it out yet. It means I'm also not—" He paused. "I'm not asking you to go." She looked at him. Lily appeared in the doorway, on schedule, hair disordered from sleep, holding one of the measuring cups she had apparently taken to bed with her, which was a new development. She looked at Ethan in the small chair, and at Nora on the cot, and at the space between them with the measuring cup held at her side, and she made the assessment the way she made all assessments, quickly, completely, with the full confidence of someone who had not yet learned to second-guess herself. Then she walked into the room, climbed up onto the cot, and sat down between them. She looked at Ethan. She looked at Nora. She held up the measuring cup. "That's the 1-cup measure," Ethan said. "Medium size." Lily considered this. She put it in Nora's lap. "I think that's for you," Ethan said. "I gathered," Nora said. They sat in the small room with the afternoon going golden through the window and the soup smell coming through the wall, and Lily settled between them with the absolute authority of someone who had arranged things correctly and was pleased with the result. "The independent audit," Nora said after a moment. "Will take 3 to 4 months," Ethan said. "The forensic review of Marcus's case. We'll take whatever it takes. You're going to have to do a lot of very difficult things in the next few months," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know that. And she looked at Lily. "I'm not sure what I am in the context of those things, what category that falls in." "Neither am I," he said. "But I'm not particularly concerned with categories right now." He looked at her directly, and without the managed distance, without the recalibration. "I'm more concerned with what's actually true." She looked back. "And what's actually true?" "That my daughter is sitting between a 2-year-old who knocked a glass out of my hand 5 nights ago and a woman who spent 3 weeks in my house finding everything I couldn't find and then drove to Irvine this afternoon when she didn't have to." He paused. "And that I haven't had anyone in this house in a very long time who I wanted to still be here in the morning." Lily leaned against Nora's arm. She appeared to have decided the conversation had been proceeding satisfactorily and could now continue without her active management. Nora looked at her daughter's head, and then at the window, and then at the man in the undersized chair who was watching her with 17 things in his face that had gradually, over the length of this afternoon, been resolving into fewer things, all of them clearer. "I've been very careful," she said, "for a long time, about what I let matter." "I know," he said. "I'm not sure I know how to stop." "You don't have to stop," he said. "You can just," he considered, "add to the list." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Okay," she said. It was not by any objective measure a resolution. The audit was ongoing. The forensic review hadn't started. Claudia's lawyers would file within the week, and the process would be long and grinding, and would require Nora to testify at some point, and would pull certain things into the light that she had kept carefully in the dark for professional reasons. She had a final report to write, and a career to figure out, and a daughter who collected measuring cups and knocked things over with great deliberateness, and had, 5 days ago, changed everything by running across a study toward something amber-colored that she thought was apple juice. None of it was simple. None of it was clean. It was all approximately as complicated as the real things tended to be, which was more complicated than she planned for, and less complicated in certain essential ways than she had feared. Outside, the Newport Beach afternoon was at its clearest. The gate at the end of the Eucalyptus Drive stood open. It had been open all afternoon, and neither of them had thought to close it. And Nora thought that this was probably fine for now. The things that needed to be out had gone out. The things that needed to come in had come in. The fountain in the side garden ran. Lily looked at the window. Then she pointed at it at the afternoon light, at the glass, at the view of the garden beyond the one that could be seen from the kitchen table, and the small room and the east wing study, and most of the rooms in the house. The view that was simply the house's ordinary view, the one that had been here before any of them, and would be here after. She pointed at it and said with the complete conviction of someone who has taken a survey and reached a conclusion, "There." Nora looked at the window. Ethan looked at Lily. "Yeah," Nora said quietly. "Okay." The audit took 14 weeks. Torres testified voluntarily and without retraction, his account matching the documentation with the precision of a man who had memorized the facts, because facts were the only thing he'd had to hold on to. The forensic review of Marcus Hayes's cardiac event was reopened through the district attorney's office on the strength of the warfarin analysis and the pattern evidence. It would take considerably longer with no guaranteed outcome because some things were irreversible, even when they were also provable. Claudia Hayes's attorneys did file within the week, mounting a challenge to the admissibility of the safe documents that occupied the court's attention for 6 weeks before being dismissed. Claudia did not retreat quietly. She was not a woman who retreated quietly, and the process of her defense, meticulous funded, conducted with the posture of someone who had not yet conceded. The room was, in its way, the final expression of everything she had been for the years of her management of the Hayes estate. Controlled, strategic, and entirely unable to account for the variables she had decided in advance were too small to matter. She had not accounted for Torres. She had not accounted for Marcus's note surviving in the safe for 8 months without being found or destroyed. She had not accounted for the glass fragments. She had not accounted for Lily. The Meridian accounts were frozen within 48 hours of the board meeting, the money stabilized, the misappropriation quantified. The number, when it was finally calculated with full forensic accounting, was large enough that it explained everything about the timeline, why Marcus had to be silenced before he could get the note to Ethan, why Ethan had to be removed before the audit cycle closed, why there was no version of this plan that could afford to wait. Claudia had not been playing a long game. She had been playing a game that was running out of time, and speed had made it sloppy, and sloppiness had made it visible, and visibility had made it this. Nora submitted her final report on a Thursday, 11 weeks after the board meeting. It was the most thorough report she had ever written, 53 pages fully sourced with exhibits, the kind of document that functioned as its own argument in the way that good evidence functioned, not by insisting on conclusions, but by arranging facts until conclusions were the only logical destination. She sent it to Patricia. She sent a copy to the board's general counsel. She kept one copy for herself in the encrypted folder where she kept the things that mattered. Then she closed her laptop and went to find Lily, who was in the garden with Marta, doing something with the fountain that Marta was tolerating with the equanimity of someone who had over 11 weeks arrived at a specific and mutually agreeable arrangement with the concept of Lily. Ethan was at his desk in the East Wing study. The bar cart was still there. Neither of them had moved it, and neither of them had discussed moving it, which was its own kind of progress. He looked up when Nora appeared in the doorway. "Done," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Come, sit down," he said. She came in. She didn't sit. She stood at the window and looked at the garden where Lily was trying to put something into the fountain, and Marta was trying with moderate success to redirect her. "What happens now?" he said. "For you, professionally." "Patricia has offered me a partnership position," Nora said. "At the firm. Not field work, the kind that involves an office and a team and cases that go through formal channels from the beginning. And I haven't decided." She watched Lily. "I've been doing field work for 8 years. I'm good at it. It's also—" She paused. "It gets harder to go into houses," she said finally. "After a while. You go in as someone else and you come out as yourself, and at some point the gap between those two things starts to cost something that I'm not sure I have left to spend." He was quiet for a moment. "The partnership position," he said. "Is it in Newport Beach?" She looked at him. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for 11 weeks, with the directness that had replaced the managed distance, with the steadiness that came from someone who had decided which direction he was facing and was not uncertain about it. "I'm asking," he said, "because if it's not, that's a piece of information that's relevant to a decision I've been thinking about making for some time." "What decision?" "Whether to ask you," he said, "if you'd consider staying." She looked at him. He held her gaze. He did not add anything to it. He had learned, or had always known, that some things didn't need to be elaborated, that the right statement left in the air without scaffolding around it could do more work than any number of additional words. Outside, Lily succeeded in putting whatever she was putting into the fountain and made a sound of pure triumph. "Patricia's office is in Newport Beach," Nora said. His expression did something quiet and definitive. "Then it sounds like a reasonable option," he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. "It's a very short commute from here," she said. "Very," he agreed. She looked at the garden, at Lily with the fountain, at the afternoon light on the eucalyptus, at the gate at the end of the lane which she had learned over 11 weeks was almost always open during the day and closed at night, and that this rhythm was something the house did of its own accord, a habit it had developed at some point and not let go of. She thought about going into houses as someone else and coming out as herself, and the gap between those two things, and what it cost and what might cost less. She thought about measuring cups and kidney beans and a 2-year-old who moved through the world as though things that were wrong were simply waiting to be knocked into their correct positions, which was, Nora had come to think, the most accurate worldview she had ever encountered. She thought about Ethan Hayes alone in this house for a long time, reading physical newspapers and eating at his desk, keeping a note in a safe for 8 months, with nowhere to put it. Building a case with one piece that needed the others to become true. She thought, you can just add to the list. I'll call Patricia tomorrow, she said. He nodded once. She didn't leave the doorway. He didn't turn back to his desk. The afternoon held them both in it unhurried, without agenda. The kind of afternoon that didn't come around often in a life organized around operational timelines and the next handhold. Outside, Lily was coming back toward the house. They could hear her footsteps on the garden path, the particular rhythm of a 2-year-old in motion, always slightly faster than anyone expected, always carrying more certainty than the pace suggested. She appeared in the study doorway behind Nora. She looked at the room. She looked at Ethan. She walked past Nora directly to Ethan's desk and placed on the surface with great ceremony a small, smooth stone she had apparently retrieved from the garden fountain. She stepped back. She looked at it. Ethan looked at it. It's for the right pile, Lily said. He looked at Nora. Nora looked at him. Neither of them could fully explain at that particular moment why this was as funny as it was, but it was. And Ethan's expression did the thing it had been doing more often over the course of 11 weeks. The thing Nora had first seen in the study on the night of the glass. The thing between amusement and its absence, which she now understood was simply the face he made when something caught him genuinely, rather than through the filter. And it stayed there longer than usual. He picked up the stone. He looked at it. He set it on the corner of his desk. It is, he said. Lily, satisfied, turned and went back to the garden. Nora watched her go. The afternoon came in through the west-facing windows, the same windows it had come through the night of the glass, the same angle, the same gold. Nothing in the room was the same, and the light had no way of knowing that, and this seemed correct. She stayed in the doorway. He went back to his papers. The house was quiet in the way it was quiet now, not the pressured silence of before, not the silence of held breath, but the silence of a place that had exhaled and found on the other side of the exhale that there was air.